Welcome to the June 2022 Phoenix Area Real Estate Market Update. I'm Beth Riebenstorff, founder of the Reby Homes team. Well, the news, it is abuzz with what many have been anticipating, the shift. It is happening. While it's still very definitely a seller's market, things are clearly shifting from the insane frenzy that's been advantageous to sellers towards a more balanced market. And this is very welcome news for buyers. New listings have increased 113% over this time last year in every price point over $400,000. The exception is that under $400,000 mark. The increase in listings is very good news for buyers because they have more options. And when there are more listings, well, sellers have to compete, which brings us closer to a more normal market. Normal means typical contract requirements like appraisal and inspection contingencies, well, they can remain in place for a buyer instead of being waived. The median number of days prior to contract is now 11, and that's up 4 days from just last month. For some buyers, this moment is bittersweet because it does come with higher mortgage rates. With that said, history shows that interest rates typically do not stay high or low forever. The Mortgage Bankers Association expects mortgage rates to decline to 4.4% by 2024. For sellers, well, as supply continues to rise sharply, sellers will find that they must shift to compete for the buyers, as the buyers will now have more options. Certain factors will start changing rapidly, such as the percentage of closings over list price and the median dollar amount over asking price. April 2022 saw 58% of sales close over asking price, with a median amount of $20,000 over ask. So far, closings in June show 51% closing over asking price, with a median amount of $15,000 over ask. Price reductions, well, they're up 258% in 10 weeks. The not so great news for buyers is interest rates. So let's put that in perspective by looking at the rate environment going back to December 30th, 2021, where rates were at a remarkable 3.1%, an absolutely phenomenal rate. And then it quickly began to rise. And about the third week in April, well, rates, we can see a trend that it seems to be a plateau. Now, what does that mean for rates in the future? Oh, let's look at rates in the previous 5 decades. The current average rate of 5.09% is above the last decade, but below the previous 4 decades. Now, that can be perceived very differently if you were around in those decades. And if you weren't, then it's all you've known. So, this return to 5, 6, 6.5%, the perspective is very different. Another perspective is the existing home sales nationally. This shows the volume of home sales back in 2017, so pre-pandemic levels, around 5.5 million. And then the frenzy, when the concept of home became extremely important, and along with the extremely low interest rates, drove demand to the 6.2 million mark in 2021. And as we see, the seasonally adjusted numbers for April 2022 is on track for 5.6 million. So back to pre-pandemic volumes as interest rates and demand also return to pre-pandemic volumes. We can also see the shift from white hot selling market to perhaps just hot by looking at showing activity. Now, this clearly shows the skyrocketing demand in 20 and 21, and now the shift showing up in April as demand slows down. The shift also shows up in the average days on market of 17 days, which still a very hot market. And then the average number of offers on a home, 5.5 offers on a home. And that speaks to the shift to the slowdown, not a decline, but a shift to what looks to be pre-pandemic levels. Now that brings us to the topic of inflation and recession. So does recession automatically equate to a housing crash? Historically, going back to the 80s, there have been 6 recessions. And what happened? Well, 4 out of the 6 times, home prices actually appreciated. 2 times they depreciated. In the 90s, it was less than 2%, so marginal depreciation. What everyone remembers is 2008, when homes lost almost 20% in value. We've done several videos that do a deep dive into the driving factors that caused the 2008 crash. Here's a quick review. Back then, financing guidelines were a huge contributor. Low qualifying standards. 100% financing was common, so today there's much higher equity from the start and much lower foreclosure risk. Short term and interest only payments, meant that when the adjustment hit and the loan converted to include taxes and insurance, well, the payments skyrocketed. Likewise, adjustable rate loans back then, well, they had the same issue, major increase in the monthly payment versus today's fixed rate that does not adjust. The whole concept of unstable or unqualified buyers with no credit, poor credit, or just stated income led to very high foreclosure risk. The lending environment and overall guidelines today, well, they're very different, including the fact that 58.7% of all homes have at least 50% in equity. And new home development, back then, it outpaced population growth for 10 years. Definitely not the case right now, as evidenced by the labor shortages and the supply chain challenges. While there is cause for celebration, things are definitely shifting. There is no evidence that suggests home prices will stop appreciating. There is an expected deceleration of appreciation as higher interest rates slow the demand and drive up inventory. The big takeaway is this: when you own a home and prices are rising, that means more equity. So, home values going up is only a problem when you are trying to buy. If you own, it's a gift. Thanks for tuning in for this June 2022 Phoenix area market update. We hope you have a wonderful summer and we'll check in with you next month.